coffee consumers and crime connoisseurs. Welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, Mugshot Mornings, where we explore true crime one sip at a time. On today's episode, we'll be discussing a couple that caused absolute mayhem in the United States in the 1950s. In the 1950s, in the beautiful state of Nebraska, a tale of terror unfolded. At the center of this macabre narrative were two unlikely figures, Caril and Fugate, a young girl just shy of her 17th birthday, and Charles Starkweather, a brooding drifter with a penchant for violence. Their tumultuous relationship ignited a spree of murder and mayhem that gripped the nation as they embarked on a cross-country rampage, leaving a trail of devastation that shook the very foundation of society. But what drove this unlikely pair to commit such heinous acts? Was it a twisted love story gone awry? Or were darker forces at play? Stay tuned and buckle up as I tell you the wild story of two individuals who tried to be Bonnie and Clyde. A lot of you know me from doing YouTube, and although this is still on YouTube for audio listeners, I do have it on YouTube for the images and just the visuals if you really like to, see whenever people are talking, or some people are only audio listeners. I have it on both. This is new. If you don't want to listen to me talk about what this podcast is about, I would go ahead and skip forward. I will try to leave a timestamp. For the video listeners, I'm not sure how to get you to skip forward if you don't want to listen to this. For new listeners, but for people that have followed me on YouTube, my almost 1,000 subscribers, really appreciate you. Thank you so much. I have been working on this podcast for about 6 months now. Did crimes, cults, and conspiracies on YouTube, but for the people who are wondering where I've been, let me just explain. So, I was in another place when I started crimes, cults, and conspiracies, and then we ended up moving away, and then we bought a house, and then we ended up getting married, and there was a lot going on. I bought a camera. I sat down to film a bunch of different times, and the camera was not focusing. Come to find out that it didn't have video audio focus, so then I had to sell that camera, end up selling it to my friend, and then right after that, I bought this camera, and then I really just wanted to come back and I wanted to do more of a podcast format, and then also upload it to like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so that way I could. It's just a little bit easier with the schedule that I have, because trying to sit down and read a script and then you read it wrong and you're re-editing, it's just a lot. So let me kind of briefly discuss how I'm going to format this podcast and why I'm so excited about it. So I wanted to format this podcast by incorporating two things that I really am interested in the most, and that is coffee and true crime and cults, conspiracies, anything kind of dark and twisted type of stories. I really like it. You can ask anybody. Since like 2019, I've wanted to open a coffee shop and incorporate true crime and just kind of make it like a creepy styled coffee shop. You know what I mean? Like there's a coffee shop that I actually visited recently in Indianapolis, Indiana, that is horror themed, and that was really cool, but I've always wanted to incorporate these two things together. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be introducing the story, and then I will be talking about a coffee that I'm sipping on, and I will try a different coffee every single episode, kind of give updates on my life for the people who care. Of course, I know a lot of people come from the story. This first episode, it's not going to be this long in separate episodes. I'm just kind of giving a background and kind of an update. And so each time I am going to be talking about coffee and then going into the story. And I'm very excited about that. I have a new setup. I'm still learning how to do the setup, and I'm still learning how I kind of want to have it. As of right now, I need a taller tripod because I have my shelves behind me and you can't see them, and they're decorated really cool, and I'm really excited, but you can't see them because I don't have a tall tripod and whatever. Okay, whatever. So anyways, with the coffee that I'm sipping today, I did go to Scooters. Okay, if you don't know what Scooters is, you'll need to hop on Scooters. Get on Scooters. What are you doing? So I went to Scooters and I got their iced Caramelicious with oat milk. So you definitely need to go to Scooters. And if you haven't, get on it. I'm sorry that I was gone. I had full intentions of coming back. I did all last year in 2023. I sat down to film, I want to say like 6 times, and it just didn't feel right. I know that I had a playlist of like all 50 states. I will not be continuing that. For the people who are continuing from YouTube, for first-time listeners, you don't know what I'm talking about. I do have more that I have on my YouTube channel. You can go watch those. I have it in a separate playlist. So something didn't feel right. I wasn't excited to film, but I really, really, really wanted to do a podcast format, but I didn't know how to transition it. There was a lot of stories that I wanted to cover, but they were in different states. I was more excited about those stories, and I felt like the other ones was more of a chore. And again, that's not okay if this is something that you're doing to have fun. Like, it's kind of like a hobby. So I know that I'm rambling at this point. Okay, we'll get into the story, I promise. I really appreciate people who have reached out to me. I've had people from different states who have been like, look, I've been following your channel. Like, are you coming back? We do miss you. I wish you would have never left YouTube. And I didn't leave YouTube. I know that it looked like I did, but I am excited to be back into this format with a new story. It is one that was going to be continuing from my true crime in all 50 states segment that I had going. So if y'all are interested, we're going to continue that, except it's going to be in a new format. So this is actually a part of the true crime. Whatever. Okay, whatever. I don't know what I'm doing. So let's ease into the story. I talked about my coffee. I will try to figure out how to incorporate it more, but if you listen to me sip, I need it. Okay, leave me alone. All right, so without further ado, we will be discussing 2 really wild individuals who it is said that they're Bonnie and Clyde. I don't know if they right out said that they were trying to be Bonnie and Clyde, but let's just go into the story, okay? So we have 2 people that are the sole focus of today's case, and that is Charles Raymond Starkweather and Caril Ann Fugate. They are known to be some of Nebraska's most notorious mass murderers. For several days, the residents of Lincoln were in a consistent state of panic, hysteria, and despair. They had been compared to the couple, Bonnie and Clyde, who went on an almost 2-year crime spree from 1932 to 1934 across southern states. Charles and Caril started their murder spree in the late 1950s, roughly 1958, but it quickly ended only 1 week after chaos. The quiet streets of Nebraska became a frantic manhunt after these 2 individuals seemed to murder anyone that they came across. So, this is the chilling saga of Charles and Caril, Bonnie and Clyde 2.0. Alright, so to start us off, we're going to be discussing Charles Starkweather. So Charles Raymond Starkweather was born on November 24th, 1938 in Lincoln, Nebraska. He was one of 7 children, making him the 3rd oldest. His father, Guy Starkweather, was often unemployed due to him having arthritis in his hands, and it made it really hard for him to work. Charles's mother, Helen, was a waitress, and due to his father being unemployed pretty regularly, his mother was only bringing in tips. The family was really poor, and they still managed to get food on the table and keep their shelter up, but they didn't have the luxurious lifestyle that a lot of people have. There is a fly on my camera. So it is said that his parents were loving and decent, and he experienced a normal childhood until he reached his school age. Charles has later explained that his hatred for society stemmed from his first day of school on the kindergarten playground, where kids made fun of his speech impediment. He stated that this was the moment that his heart turned black and filled with hate and rage. Charles was fairly short compared to other boys his age. As mentioned before, he had a slight speech impediment. He was bow-legged and also had a nearsighted vision where he couldn't read the biggest letters on an eye chart. This was only known whenever he went to his teenage years, so before this, people just thought he was maybe intellectually impaired because of what seemed like his inability to read and poor vision, and unfortunately because of this, he was bullied quite often. The school believed that he was a slow learner and academics did not come easily to him. His parents tried to pass it off that he just wasn't applying himself, but it was really more his vision that was affecting him. Eventually, he didn't care about school, and because he generally couldn't see the board, it altered his grades very negatively. Charles became obsessed with guns, hunting, and was consistently involved in fistfights. Charles started to gain some muscle and started to better his physique. He was finally able to stand up against the ones who would bully him, and he started building his confidence back. He was known to be really shy and calm before he became a bully himself. He started to progressively grow into the mindset of loving this aggressive side to himself. It was no longer a way to defend himself, but he started to like the feeling of harming others. He started to dive more into this bad boy behavior. It started becoming an obsession of dominance, and it was no longer targeted to just only his bullies, but he started to target his parents and his siblings as well. One of his favorite movies was Rebel Without a Cause, and he was obsessed with the actor James Dean in that movie. He even started dressing like him and mimicking the things that James would do. He adopted his Live Fast, Die Young motto. This was soon before he met Caril and Fugate. During his senior year of high school, Charles dropped out just at 18 years old. His parents didn't like this, and they didn't pry because at this point they were walking on eggshells around him and very scared of him. He then started a job at a warehouse near Whittier Junior High School, where his new soon-to-be girlfriend, Caril Ann Fugate, went to school. Caril was only 13 years old when he spotted her, and he was smitten. Now, okay, let me just pause right there, okay? Because we know that that's gross and illegal. But unfortunately, this is a different time, and this regularly happened where you hear stories of people who were in their 20s, started dating young teenagers, and still wrong, but very normal around this time. And Caril's parents still did not like this, but just to give a warning, because people are going to be grossed out, so, There are two sources that are different that explain how the two met. So one source states that Caril's older sister and one of Charles's friends were dating at the time, so that is how the couple was introduced. But another report states that Charles dated Caril's older sister, and this eventually led to him dating her younger sister, Caril. But I can't say which one is accurate. Many sources say different things. But for this specific two events specifically, doesn't matter. The two started dating and had a romantic relationship. Charles was only 18 and Caril was 13. So they knew that their parents would not approve of this relationship, and because of the age gap, this relationship kind of started off really secretive. Caril was young, petite, and very beautiful, and then something about her made Charles just kind of really want to risk it all. A part of that bad boy type, again, that was mentioned earlier, that he kind of started to delve into. This fly, y'all, get off my camera. So, one day, I think this was before either of the family knew that the two were together, Charles lets Caril drive his father's car, and she crashes it. So this was the car that he shared with his father, Guy, and Guy was furious whenever he confronts Charles about this and the seriousness of this incident, and that he no longer has a car to go to work. Charles really shrugs it off as no big deal, and this was whenever Guy explained that this was kind of the last straw, and he kicks Charles out of the family home. Now that Charles did not have a way to work, he had to quit his warehouse job. So he no longer had any money, and this ends up leading to Charles fantasizing about what are some things that he could do to make money. Was it to, get another job? No. He started to scope out different neighborhoods for potential places he could rob. He would look at houses, see the cars that they would drive, and that would kind of indicate how much money the family bring in, and he would plan on whenever he would come back to rob the house. The relationship with Caril was still going really strong. They're madly in love. Caril's family started to understand the relationship, but they tried to keep her from him. As always, Caril still saw him behind their backs because rebel without a cause, tying that in. I think Charles had a big hand in Caril's acting out. So, I hate to even call this a relationship because it definitely is not by law, but for the sake of this story, it is just easier to call that this was a romantic relationship and the two were dating and together. So on November 30th, 1957, just as Charles was 19 years old, he committed his first of many murders. Robert Colvert was a young 21-year-old male who had just recently been discharged from the U.S. Navy. He was married to his high school sweetheart, and they were expecting their first child. Robert would work the night shift at a gas station in Lincoln, Nebraska. Robert was described as a loving and caring man and just so overall kind to anyone and everyone that he met. Charles entered the gas station where Robert was working, wanting to buy a stuffed animal for Caril. But Charles didn't have any money, and so he asked Robert, is it okay if you do this favor for me? I really want to get this for my girlfriend. And again, Robert declined, said, "I'm sorry, you don't have any money." Well, he asked, I can come back and pay you. Again, Robert says no, most likely because he didn't know this man and he had no proof that he was going to come back and pay for the stuffed animal. Well, this absolutely, completely enraged Charles. He leaves, but this incident is taking over his mind, and it really just makes him more angry. Around 3 a.m., Charles went back to the gas station and purchased a pack of gum, but he did not bring in a weapon. Quickly after, he headed back into the gas station and demanded that Robert give him all of the money in the register. He was wearing a red bandana on the lower half of his face to cover his identity and was pointing a shotgun directly at Robert. After receiving $90 in paper bills and around $10 in change, he forces Robert into a car and drives him to a remote area. As he tries to get Robert out, the two men start fighting. Robert is desperately trying to wrestle the gun from Charles, and during this fight, the gun goes off and it hits Robert directly in the kneecap. Charles takes this opportunity to his advantage and grabs the gun and shoots Robert point blank in the head. Charles stated that this was his first kill and it was really enlightening and he felt untouchable. He did not have any remorse for his actions. Like I stated before, when Charles was a bit younger, he really liked the feeling of aggression and dominance. This murder fueled his fire and he wanted more. Charles took his blood money and went thrifting with it for some new shoes, shirts, shorts, and a new jacket. This new feeling he had of murder didn't make him feel guilty or scared, and he felt so much power from it. Again, Charles really enjoyed this, and all he wanted to do was find Caril and tell her what he had just done. But he only told her about the robbery. He did not confide that he was the murderer. The news started spreading around the town of Robert's death, which Carol Ann started wondering if maybe Charles did more than just rob the store. Carol Ann asked Charles if he was the one who killed Robert, but Charles denies it, and he states that maybe someone came after and shot him. But again, that doesn't really add up, and Carol did not believe him at all. Police believed that Robert was killed by a transient, and so they didn't really investigate any further. Robert was laid to rest on December 12th, 1957, leaving behind his wife and his unborn child. On January 21st, 1958, Charles went over to Carol's home and was supposedly looking for her, but she was at school, and he most definitely knew that she was. Again, he is literally dating a child, and it's Tuesday. Carol's stepfather, Marion, and her mother, Velda, were home with their 2-year-old daughter, Carol's sister, Betty Jean. So Charles stated that he was looking for Carol, right? Well, why did he look for her with a loaded rifle and backup ammunition? According to a few sources that I read, Carol's parents did not care for Charles, and this really bothered him. Well, I would kind of understand because, you're dating my daughter and you're a grown man, and she's like 12. 13. Sorry, she is 13. So, the following events that happened after Charles arrived at the home are a little sketchy because I did read different things on each article, so bear with me as I try to explain the set of details that pretty much all matched each other. So apparently, Carol claimed that she broke up with Charles earlier that Sunday, so only 2 days before. So that Tuesday, which was the 21st, Charles told the family that he was looking for Carol, but he also wanted to speak with them as well. He asked if he could come inside and speak with the family about his relationship with their daughter, to which they obviously replied, no. Charles nodded, said that he understood, but in all actuality, he went back to his car to grab his shotgun. He goes back to the home and he forces his way inside. Marion and Velda Fugate were both shot in the head, and the 2-year-old Betty Jean was strangled and stabbed to death. All 3 bodies were placed in little buildings around the home. Marion was placed in the chicken coop, Velda in the outhouse, and Betty Jean in the trash. Carol explains that she arrived home from school, and she was met by Charles. Charles showed Carol the bodies of her family and threatened that if she did not cooperate, he would kill her too. The couple would then stay in the house for the next few days while the body were just decomposing around the property. Carol's grandmother, sister, brother-in-law, and Charles' brother would stop by the house to see what was going on because they hadn't heard the family or from Charles, and they would say, "Oh, everything's fine, they just have the flu, come back later." They even put a sign on the door explaining that the family had the flu and to please stop disturbing them. January 27th, 1958, Carol's grandmother knew something was suspicious about the situation and she called the police. The grandmother heard from her daughter Carol Ann's mother every single day. Now it had been a week and she had not heard from her daughter, and she was beginning to worry that the story the couple had said might be more than just the flu. Her grandmother stopped by the house for the last time and threatened to call the police, which scared Carol and Charles. The couple packed up their belongings, got in a car, and started driving just in time before the police arrived at the home. When police arrived, the inside of the home was empty, which concerned the grandmother. For 1 week, she had believed that her daughter and her whole family besides Caril had the flu, but instead, they were missing. She didn't know they were missing. She thought they had the flu. Charles drove the couple to the farmhouse in a town called Bennett that was owned by a family friend, August Meyer. Charles and Caril got the car stuck in the mud, and August, being the really kind man that he was, offered his horses to help pull the car out of the mud. While they were following the 70-year-old man to the barn, they decided they were going to shoot and kill him once they got in the barn, along with August's dog. Caril would later say that the brutality and beating of the dog was unnecessary and horrifying, and she felt that her only option was to obey Charles in whatever he said to do. That same night, their car was stuck since they killed their only help, so the two started walking on foot, hoping to hitchhike and catch a ride from a passing driver. A very kind couple, Robert Jensen, who was only 17 years old, and Caril King, age 16, pulled over and offered the couple a ride. Robert and Caril, who were unsuspecting of course, didn't know the horrors of what would come next. Charles was seemingly very sweet and charming at first, and then turned completely angry and vicious. He started to yell at Robert to pull the car over to this abandoned storm cellar. Robert was then shot in the back of the head 6 times by Charles. Now, what happened to Caril? The two have completely different stories. Charles claims that Caril Ann killed the victim Caril because she was jealous whenever he tried to rape her. Caril Ann explains that she actually stayed in the car while Charles killed both Robert and Caril. That she had nothing to do with these murders. So there's a fly on my camera, and I need a drink of coffee. Just give me a moment. So Charles and Caril took the murder couple's car and left Bennett and drove back to Lincoln. This was during the early hours of the next day, January 28th. Caril chose their next victim's house, which was owned by the Ward family. Clara Ward was... Bro! That freaking fly is only landing on the camera lens. I'm losing my mind. Where did this fly come from? So, for the audio listeners, there's a fly on my camera. I know I just said that. But for the YouTubers that are watching me, if there's a fly on the lens when I've been reading and y'all see it, y'all just yeah. I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to fix it. I'm so sorry. It's not funny. I know I'm in the most important part of the story. I'm so sorry. It is just wild that just happened. Okay. Let's get back to the story. Clara Ward was tied up along with their deaf maid, Lillian. The couple was pretty tired, so they took turns guarding the 2 women while the other would sleep. At some point during this time, the 2 women were killed. Clara and Lillian were both stabbed in the neck and the chest, but this time, Charles was not the murderer. These 2 murders were conducted by Caril Ann. Clara's husband was not home at the time. He returned home while the couple was still in the home, and he was met with the same fate. He was shot to death only minutes upon arriving home by Charles. These lives were the 8th, 9th, and 10th victims. Before leaving the home, the couple stole some jewelry, and Charles proceeded to snap the neck of the family dog to get it to stop barking. The couple packed up the victim's car with stuff that they had stole from the home, and they left. After the Ward's murders got around to the public along with their hearing-disabled maid, the Lincoln community were livid. Searches of the city went wild, with many law enforcement agencies around the region joining together. They started doing house-by-house searches as well, but they didn't find any suspects. The governor also ordered the National Guard to come help with the search. Charles and Caril knew that the murder of the Wards had spread around and they needed a new replacement car. At this point, the couple had made it to Douglas, Wyoming, where they found a traveling salesman named Merle Collison sleeping in his car. Charles was very demanding that he get out of the car. Once Charles pulled him out, he shot Merle to death. In a later interview, Charles said that his gun actually jammed and it was Caril who shot Merle. There were around 9 gunshot wounds found on Merle's body. I'm not sure what was wrong with the vehicle, but apparently it was fairly new, so it was hard for Charles to operate it. There was something about the parking brake, and I'm not sure if this was a new thing for cars in this time era, but they were having some trouble getting it to work. There was a passing motorist named Joe Sprinkle, and he stopped to help out the couple. Joe and Charles spoke for a moment, But Joe's attention quickly shifted to seeing Merle's body shoved in the car under the dashboard. Charles noticed that Joe had spotted the body, and he drew his gun onto Joe. Joe was a pretty big guy, and he managed to get the gun away from Charles after a small fight. A deputy sheriff from Natrona County named William Romer had spotted the scene driving by and quickly pulled up his car and ran up to the two gentlemen. This fight was interrupted not only by the sheriff, but Carol Ann got out of the car and started running to the sheriff screaming, "Help me, he's crazy and he's going to kill me. He just killed a man. His name is Charles Starkweather, he's going to kill me." Charles jumped into the car that belonged to the Wards and quickly spun out and headed in the direction towards Douglas, leaving behind Carol Ann. The couple was unaware that there was a search for the two, and Carol had informed the sheriff that the man who had just escaped was Charles Starkweather, a wanted man. Sheriff Romer called for backup, saying that Charles was in the area and trying to flee, so a roadblock was set up around the Douglas city limits to hopefully find Charles and the car description. Charles eventually got to the roadblock, but blew through it, creating a high-speed chase of over 100 miles per hour. Officers were firing shots at the vehicle and eventually shattered the back window. Charles had slammed his brakes and eventually gave up after the cops had fired a couple more shots. The only reason he had stopped was that when the back window was shattered, glass had hit the back of his ear and his hand, and he believed he was shot. In a later statement, he said that he also gave up because he didn't have any more ammunition. The following day, January 29th, Charles appeared before the Wyoming Justice of the Peace for the murder of Merle Collison, the man that they had tried to steal the car from. The governor at the time, Millward Simpson, was publicly known to not be in favor of the death penalty, which Charles knew. He willingly chose to be extradited to Nebraska because he believed prosecutors would not seek the death penalty because Simpson was against the execution. However, the governor changed his mind for Charles because he was to be put to death for his involvement in the week-long murder spree. The Wyoming district attorney said that he was going to defer to Nebraska prosecutors and eventually sign the papers for Charles to be released by Wyoming custody to Nebraska. On January 31st, only a couple days later, Charles was returned to Nebraska to face his trial that would begin later that May. Charles did not want to plead guilty by reasons of insanity, but his attorneys offered the insanity defense. May 23, 1958, the jury did not believe this insanity plea, and Charles Starkweather was found guilty and sentenced to death for only one of the murders, the teenager Robert Jensen. At this time, he had confessed to the murder of Robert, his first victim whom he had robbed and killed at the gas station. Carol's journey to be sentenced was very difficult and had a lot of obstacles. She was very frantic and upset, so much to the point that at the time of her surrender, she had to be sedated at the jail cell that she was first put in. The next morning, Carol was crying for her mom and was asking why she couldn't call her parents. She was playing as if she didn't know that they had been killed. The sheriff who had shot out the back glass of the car that Charles was driving initially believed Carol had no idea that her family was dead. Friday, January 31st, she was told that her family had been killed and she broke down. Charles, around this time, told law enforcement that Carol was a hostage and she had absolutely nothing to do with any of the crime spree. Sheriff Romer, the one that Carol had ran to, said that Carol admitted to him that she knew her family was dead and Charles had killed them. Sheriff Heflin backed up this claim by saying that when she was first taken into custody, there were clippings of her family's murders in her pocket. In response to this, Nebraska prosecutors charged her also with murder. In November of 1958, Carol went to trial as the youngest female in U.S. history to be charged with first-degree murder. At this time, Charles had changed his story by saying that she actively participated in the killings, and some of the victims were her victims and not his. He was brought from his prison cell and told the jury that she was never hostage like she had claimed and was willing to murder for him. He said that there were many times he left Carol alone, and if she was such a hostage, she had multiple opportunities to leave and she did not. Carol also maintained her innocence, that she thought Charles was just holding her family hostage and did not know that he killed them. Charles later explained that she again was an active participant in the killings of her own family. However, this is alleged, along with all the other murders, since the two were trying to pit everything against each other. However, the jury and judge on this trial did not believe her, and she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Basically, the jury believed that she had enough opportunities to leave, and she didn't. Charles was really upset by the sentencing because he believed that she was just as involved in any of the murders as he was, and she should be put to death as well. On June 25th, 1959, at 12:04 a.m., Charles Starkweather was executed in the electric chair. He had no last words, and he remained quiet after he was strapped. However, when the prison guards came to get Charles to bring him to be executed, he asked, "What's your hurry?" His last meal were cold cuts, although he was offered steak. Charles was only 20 years old at the time of his execution. He was buried in Wyuka Cemetery in Lincoln along with 5 of his victims: Marion, Velda, Betty Jean, and the Ward couple. I don't like that he was buried with them, but I wasn't there that time to bury him somewhere else. So now, however, Caril has a different story once again. Caril was considered a model prisoner, and in 1976, after only serving 18 years, she was released and moved to Michigan. She lived a quiet life as a janitor up until 1996, where she made her first radio appearance after the state refused to pardon her. This was the first time that she had spoke of the event since her murder spree in 1958. Caril got married in 2007 to Frederick Clare, but in 2013, the two were in a pretty bad car accident, and she survived, but sadly her husband was killed. Caril Ann Fugate is still alive today and is currently 78 years old. She requested to be pardoned again in 2020, but again was refused. The couple were referenced in many TV shows and movies, including Criminal Minds. They inspired the 1963 film The Sadist, the 1973 film Badlands, California in 1993, and Starkweather in 2004. So going back to if Caril was actually involved or not, I do believe so. We will truly know who really fired the shots and who didn't. It was really just Caril's word against Charles. Caril still claims that she's innocent even after 50 years, but do you remember when they were in the storm cellar when they took Caril and Robert, the 2 teenagers? So Caril had stayed back and that's what Charles says. So if he had left the keys in the car, she could have drove off, or she could have ran on foot. And also, they took turns sleeping, watching the 2 victims in the Ward home. So why didn't she leave whenever he was sleeping? So she had opportunities to leave. Again, we will truly never know who actually, fired the shots and did the murders because it's their word against each other's. There are times that she could have left, so I don't believe that she's fully innocent. But there was also something that I read where they had stopped at a diner at one point during their crime spree, and Caril sat and ate at the diner's bar and ate 4 hamburgers. And this is according to the waitress, but why didn't she tell the waitress that she was in trouble? There were also other people in the restaurant, so why didn't she go up to them and secretly ask for help? She willingly got back in the car after they ate, so I don't know. I don't want to... I want to believe a victim if they said they're a hostage, but at the same time, I think she was involved. Again, it's their words against each other's. But, that is the story for me today. This is a doozy. People trying to be Bonnie and Clyde. Recently, I don't know, but back in the day, I guess it was kind of a theme, kind of a trend, I guess, back in the day. So I don't know. Let me know what y'all think, and if y'all have any requests or anything that you would like, please post them in the comments of future episodes. I'm very excited to continue this podcast. I'm over the moon. I've worked on it for so long. I know that there's things that I still gotta work on and things that I need to do. But thank you so much for watching, and I really appreciate, and for my audio listeners, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to rate this podcast, so that way, it helps out this channel and it helps out the podcast gain more people and more followers. Thank you so much again for listening. And if y'all have any ideas, or if you have any, feedback on how to better this podcast, please let me know, and I would love to hear your suggestions. But other than that, I hope you'll have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.